Good morning, Lagos. Good morning, Lusaka. Good morning, Africa. On a Sunday morning, October the 24th, 2021, we are here live from our studio in Lagos, Nigeria, to join Zimbabwe as they mark 57 years of, we're here to join Zambia as it marks 57 years of its independence. 57. My name is Solulokwe Adele Balogun, and you're live from our studios here in Lagos, Nigeria on News Central.
Thank you very much for joining us wherever you are in Zambia, Kitwe, Lusaka, Livingstone. We're here to bring you a special independent broadcast as Zambia turns 57 today. And we have a special array of resource persons lined up for you. We'll be discussing Zambia's economy. We'll be looking at the youth and the future, and also politics and governance. And this is at the back of the recent swearing-in of President Hakainde Hichilema. He's spent less than 100 days in office, so there's a lot of work to be done, and I look forward to the conversations we'll be having today.
And as we said, Gbenga says a lot of work to be done, then also a lot of conversations to be had. The theme we're focusing on is between priorities and promises. There is so much potential that Zambia has held over the past few years. And as many of us know, COVID struck a blow to almost every single country on this planet. But Zambia's position is slightly more tenuous than that. And there are a lot of conversations around the economic future of the country and how the presidents will move Zambia from where it was to where he believes and many others believe it can go. The hashtag that is trending right now as Zambians across the world and across the continent celebrate is hashtag Zambia is 57 and hashtag Zambia at 57. You can join the conversations with that hashtag as well. We will be on social media looking for your comments, looking for your contributions, even your questions to any of our guests as it may be this morning as we take a look at all things Zambia. Again, welcome. We say happy 57th Independence Day to Zambia, and we will get started right now. But before we introduce our guest, we've put together a few special packages, some Zambians sharing why they love their country, a focus on some of the notable Zambian personalities, and a few facts about this great country on the continent.
On October 24, 1964, Zambia became an independent nation. The landlocked country, officially known as the Republic of Zambia, located at the crossroads of Central, Southern, and East Africa, gained independence from the United Kingdom while Prime Minister Kenneth Kaunda became the inaugural president.
I can never sell out Africa. Never. Not me. Not these boys here. Not these girls here. We are men and women of principle. We have done all these things in search of peace.
Several years ago, in the year 1888 to be precise, Cecil Rhodes, the leader of the British South African country, obtained mineral rights in the North region by signing treaties with leaders. This was done in exchange for protection from invasion. The region later became known as the Copper Belt because of the abundance of minerals found there. Northern and Southern Rhodesia, which metamorphosed into Zambia and Zimbabwe, respectively, were eventually proclaimed a British sphere of influence due to the thriving business activities which led to Britain accepting that Africans should be given more power than the federal government was willing to admit. Hence, the Zambia African National Congress and United Nations Independence Party were created, and the latter agreed to take part in election under a new constitution led by Kenneth Kaunda, a former teacher and civil servant. In 1962, elections were held, which resulted in an African majority in the Legislation Council and a coalition between two African nationalist parties. The council passed resolution calling for secession from the federation and demanding an internal self-government under a new constitution. By December 1963, the federation was dissolved, and in January the following year, Kaunda won the election as Prime Minister of Northern Rhodesia. October 24 will continue to be referenced as historic in modern-day Zambia, as the British colony of Northern Rhodesia became the independent Republic of Zambia. Till date, the Independence Day celebration is done throughout the country, especially in the capital city, Lusaka. For 2 consecutive days, the colors of the country, red, green, black, and orange, are used in decorations and sewn into extravagant designs to celebrate the freedom of the South African nation. Happy Independence Day, Zambia.
And just a quick look at Zambia's journey to independence there, a journey that was happening 57 years ago, officially becoming the independent Republic of Zambia. And now, 57 years later, we're looking at what is next for the country coming out of some very tough, particularly tough economic times.
And it's interesting to note that this 57th independence anniversary is quite unique in the sense that it's the first time that Zambia will be celebrating Independence Day without the Colossus, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, the founding father of Zambia. So he will surely be missed. He passed on earlier this year.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of conversation as to the legacies left behind by some of Zambia's leaders and rulers and how that could overshadow where Zambia wants to go next. But as we told you, the hashtag is Zambia is 57, Zambia at 57. We'll be looking forward to your contributions, your comments, your questions, as well, your feedback as we talk to our guests on the issues surrounding the economy, of course, as politics and governance comes into play as well. And we also have a conversation about the youth. But before we kicked off at 9 a.m. West African time, we were taking some of the footage coming in live from Lusaka as we saw the official ceremony to mark 57 years of independence kicking off there. The president, Hakainde Hichilema, is on ground. We've been seeing a number of processions and things. The wreath laying was also there. We are anticipating the president will be speaking anytime soon. Benga, what do you think Zambians are anticipating hearing from President Hichilema?
I mean, it's his first time as president. He actually won after contesting 6 times as for the office of president. So they're looking forward to it. And Zambians have been in this position before. You know what Nigerians call initial gragra, IGG. So when you get into office, there's a lot of promises, there's a lot of hope, and it's about I mean, they're valid because they feel it's a fresh face. He knows what he's doing. So Zambia's expectant. He's been speaking a lot. He's been to America. He did speak to the Zambian Business Forum there, and he's made a lot of promises. But he's come into office at a very terrible time. I mean, a lot of economies suffered as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Zambia's debt profile is rising, and he has a lot of work caught up for him. Yeah.
And that is a big part of the conversation, which is where we're also going to start from conversations around Zambia, which is what it was one of the world's fastest growing economies for about 10 years before COVID. But also we've heard from the new president that he inherited an empty treasury. This is the first African country to default on its sovereign loans. There's conversations around restructuring the economy, liberalizing it. And the president, who was known at one time as the cattle boy, comes from an entrepreneurial background. He comes from a business background. So many people are expecting him to bring his knowledge and expertise to bear in bringing Zambia's economy out of the situation. So let's introduce our guests as we start off first with looking at the economy, because anyone will tell you, from France to the US, from Nigeria to Zambia to South Africa to Egypt, when elections come about, it tends to be about the economy.
Yes. So I'd like to introduce our guest. We have Edmond Kagamundazi. He's an economist. Thank you very much for joining us. He's in Zambia. We also have the chairperson of the Energy Forum for Zambia, Johnston Chikwanda. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us in this special Zambian Independence broadcast. I would like to start with Mr. Edmond Kagamundazi. So Zambians pride themselves as a nation that has had peace and no civil war since they gained independence on this day in 1964. Does this peace have any multiplier effect on Zambia's economy and prosperity?
I think we'll go to Mr. John Stone. We seem to have lost the connection with Edmond. But John Stone, I hope you heard Benga's question. If not, he can quickly retake it as we kick off this conversation on the economy.
So, yeah, Johnston, my question
good morning
is this.
To you.
Yeah.
Yeah, please, you may repeat the question.
Okay, thank you, Johnston. So Zambians pride themselves as a very peaceful nation, as a nation that has had no civil war since its independence. And does this in any way have a multiplier effect on Zambia's economy and prosperity, this peace you've enjoyed since 1964?
Can I take that, or Edmond is back on the line?
Go ahead, Johnston. Go ahead and take it.
Okay, all right, okay. Yeah, it is very true that we have had the peace. When you compare with the nations around us, a number of them, almost all of them, maybe except one, have gone through turmoil. But Zambia.
Okay, so connection issues, I'm very sure we'll struggle through that today and make sure that we get these contributions. But again, just seeing images of President Hakainde Hichilema approaching the podium. As we told you, we are expecting him to speak. We don't know if that's what's going to happen next, but if it does, we will be taking the president's speech. But trying to establish a sort of background on Zambia's economy as we look forward to where the country is going to go. The world's second largest copper producer had some bumper years, but many say there's nothing to show for that. Copper levels now at an all-time high, and seeing how the country will take advantage of that. So, Edmond, let me come to you. We see with Zambia what we've seen with many African countries, an over-reliance on one particular aspect of the economy or one cash crop or one cash item. And then we sort of just leave every other part of the economy to flounder or to find its way. In terms of Zambia and where the economic situation is now, how much responsibility do you think is laid on the fact that Zambia has focused so much on copper to the detriment of other aspects of the economy that could have been used to sort of buffer citizens from any other shocks?
Thank you very much. Zambia, I think if you look at Zambia over the past 7 years, 57 years ago, this is where you walk into a school, you'd find teachers, you find classrooms, you find textbooks there. And of course, if you go to the health sector, you find hospital, you find the nurses, you find the doctors, you find the drugs. All that money was coming from the copper sector. So at that particular time, life then was very good. Copper then, when the copper industry was basically the lifeline of Zambia. Fast forward 57 years later, we're still depending on copper production. If you look at almost 80% of our exports are coming from copper. If more than also 80% of that foreign exchange is also coming from copper. No wonder we say when the copper industry sneezes, the whole economy catches a flu, mainly because copper is a mainstay of Zambia. So as it is now, if you look at even just the total revenue that is coming there, and also the employment dependency, copper again, or copper industry or extractive sector it comes on the top list. And that really has been a problem. And you find that most of the mining companies have also taken advantage of that in terms of every year you see the government trying to make progressive taxation where they would want to increase the royalty tax or income or corporate tax. And there's always the threat of the mining companies that will lay off, will stop production. And the government very much knows that once that happens, the economy will just be thrown in disarray. So as it is now, I think we have been really, really dependent on copper. And we've been talking about issues of diversification for many years again. And that has really not happened. And if you see our president, the new president, he looks at how do we actually move away from this dependency of copper. No wonder now is talking about issues of how do we ensure that agriculture sector becomes the mainstay of the engine of the economy. As it is now, if you look at even just employment, most of the people are actually employed in the agriculture sector. But again, if you look at the agriculture sector in Zambia, it became one of the political sectors. You find that it's not productive. We're pumping so much money in the agriculture sector, but nothing is really happening, because probably we've been spending most of the money in administrative issues, but less on what really is supposed to be in the like production of certain crops, issues of production of livestock, aqua farming, so that we haven't really focused on. Even so, if you look at Zambia, it's quite rich in tourism. You look at the rivers, Zambia is quite rich. If you look at the many falls that we have in the country, and just the aspect of tourism, we have a lot of potential, but we haven't really captured and realized those particular potentials. So I think our focus has been on copper. And we're hoping that that will really reduce now in the next coming years of our president. So yeah, so as it is now, I think we are really attached to copper, and we need to break away from the copper dependency. I hope we're going to manage that.
Thank you very much. A lot of hope that the current president would stop Zambia's over-reliance on copper revenue. Now, let me bring in Johnston here. Zambia, and it's important that I ask this question on the occasion of Zambia's Independence Day. Zambia is one of the countries where China is the biggest single creditor and a major provider of finance for development. What do you make of Zambia's relationship with China? There are lots of people that, they look at that relationship and say, is Zambia truly independent? And is it a mutually beneficial relationship, or is China setting up Zambia for what people have termed debt trap diplomacy?
That's a very good question. Apologies for the loss in the communication earlier on. The relationship between Zambia and China has been a long-standing, relationship. Through thick and thin, China has stood with Zambia for a very long time. When we were being colonized, by the United Kingdom, which is a bloc from the West, and during all that time of struggle for independence, our founding fathers found the solace and support from the Far East and other socialist regimes. And so based on those historical frameworks, they have mentored our relationships and the friendships up to this time. And much of the infrastructure backbone actually was funded by China. One of such is the Tanzania-Zambia railway line, which is about 1,700 kilometers, because when Zambia got her independence, it became very difficult to move the copper into other ports, through southern Rhodesia there, because it was still a hot spot. South Africa was a hot spot. So we were stuck, not just with having access to different routes, but also to bring in some imports like fuel. We were crippled tremendously. So we saw China coming to the fore and helping us construct a rail line in record time, through which vector our copper was being evacuated to the Indian Ocean. So our relationship with China, yes, it may have been overstretched, we may have overborrowed, but they are an all-weather friend to Zambia. And the infrastructure that has been funded by China, I wouldn't say it is not beneficial, because I've just given you, for instance, the Tazara rail line, which is 1,700, which has moved much of Zambia's copper to the Far East, of course, and also other infrastructure such as the hospitals and the roads. As you know, without infrastructure development, you cannot spur economic development. Part of their support has come into the electricity subsector, We have still challenges with having sufficient energy, but we have seen them fund some of our biggest power generation facilities, which is what we need to spur economic development. So I would say that yes, the financial support, the debt that we've been procuring to China has been of help, has benefited the country, but I also acknowledge that we appear to have overborrowed at the moment. But otherwise, it will not be prudent for me to say we have not benefited from the projects that we've been funding with debt from China.
Okay. So, Edmond, let me come back to you and let's talk about the numbers around this debt, because it's been a massive conversation since last year when Zambia defaulted. So now the public debt for the country to foreign and local lenders is just shy of $27 billion. That's at the end of 2021 June. And that's what the finance ministry for the country has said. Now, the figure is equal to about 115% of the country's GDP, according to the latest World Bank figure. So we see that about $16.86 billion is foreign, a lot of that in the hands of China. And of course, you have about $520 million in interest. So we've heard from Johnson, who says that relationship between China and Zambia is beneficial. There's been some good to come out of it for Zambia. But when you look at where the debt stands, whether it's owned by foreign debtors or it's owned by local debtors, when you look at it, where did this debt go? This money was borrowed for something. It was borrowed for infrastructure. Some have said it was borrowed for the former president's now White Elephant projects. Where was this money that is now the debt for the country? Where was it intended to go? What was the intention behind the borrowing that has now led Zambia to this point?
And also will chip in there, but there are certain projects that I can point to. For instance, we have got part of that debt was procured by the state-owned enterprises, not directly by central government, of which government have to guarantee. We are talking of a $2.4 billion, 750 megawatts. Hydroelectric power station, which is one of the biggest power plants to ever been, built in the recent past. Of course, the money has gone there. Building power facilities is extremely expensive. I also mentioned of the 1,700 plus rail line, kilometers. Of course, maybe that was already paid for, but we are talking of maybe the ones that has been procured of late. It went into hospitals. It went into the backbone of the road network and other infrastructure development. That is by and large the intention of where the money was being taken to. Now, whether that money was being overpriced, whether the projects were being overpriced or not, but what is there is that you can point to certain projects actually. For instance, in the 200 million plus, the decongest Lusaka road network. The people they have seen, the new roads that have been built in Lusaka, the 4 lanes, the flyover bridges, in order to ease transportation and mitigate the damaging effects of road congestion which we're experiencing in Lusaka. So there are specific projects that you can point to, and this is what this money went to this project, this money went to that project. The airports that we have at the Kenneth Kaunda International Airport, we've been using a very small international airport. There is a mega infrastructure meeting world standards, which has been built there, and also in another city as well, Ndola. So we have seen the projects which can be pointed to, but what I'm not able to unpack in this particular platform is whether the bill of quantities really demanded the extent to which the loans were being procured. Okay. Otherwise, that is a different domain altogether. But what I can state on this forum is that the projects for which money was being borrowed actually is there available on the ground. It can be pointed to, they can be pointed to.
All right, so Edmond, I'd like you to come in and share your thoughts on this, around the debt conversation, the projects, the relationship with China as well. Let's hear what you have to say.
Appreciating my colleague's sentiments about Zambian debt and the relationship of Zambia and China. From my perspective, I think the relationship between China and Zambia is one of those toxic relationships that we have right now. Because every time Zambia wants to borrow, it runs to China, because China probably will just give us money without any particular conditions on what we spend the money on. And that's what has really gotten us into trouble, because China has been giving us a lot of money and without actually asking for accountability of where we are spending that particular money. So if you look at the date that we have, we are looking at almost $13 billion of debt. One would ask, where do we actually spend this money? And one would really have difficulties in actually pointing at those particular projects. In as much as my colleague has pointed, the rail line, the hydro, road network, airport, yes, the projects are there, but if you look at what we got the money for and look at also the amount of money and the projects, those just don't tie up. I can give an example of the Eurobonds. One would ask, where did we actually spend the Eurobond? Well, it's very difficult to actually know where we actually spend the money on. And the issue is, I think the compounding factor that we have been having over the past 5 years, 7 years, is the aspect of corruption, where corruption had become the norm of how we do business. And if you look at now the first Eurobond, the second Eurobond, and the third Eurobond, and even just the fact that we have even defaulted, and you look at the amounts and principles that are supposed to be paid, the amounts are huge in terms of what we're supposed to spend on. If you look at the roads, most of the roads were really exaggerated. Talk about rail line. Rail line was supposed to have the state-of-the-art rail line by now. Where is it? We're still where we were 10 years ago. So the money just went into waste. So there's the aspect that government went to borrow and borrow and borrow without actually thinking of where we're going to spend the money and what benefit that will actually accrue. So those things were just never done. And even just the way Parliament was never involved in terms of contracting most of this debt. It was just the central government which was contracting this debt. That's why we even have difficulty in terms of like just quantifying the numbers in terms of how much do we actually owe. That is difficult because as it is now, the government used to go and borrow and from different private sector, bilateral companies. And that really put us in a bad situation. As it is now, we're spending more than 40% in terms of our national budget on issues of debt servicing. And 40% or 40, close to 40% is going to administration. What remains in terms of just spending on economic development or social development, we're looking at 20% of the national budget, which is just nothing. Most of that, again, is it's just for sustainability. So if you look at now, except more in the COVID era, looking about the health sector now, the health sector is really constrained because we just don't have the money. Most of the money is going to debt servicing. Education sector now is in a pathetic stage where we don't have, there's just nothing to be proud of in the education sector. So even just the numbers of how we're performing against students, pupils, the numbers were really depressing. So, and this is because of debt. As it is now, we're looking at everything that is there now in the economy. Look at inflation, looking at unemployment levels, look at the performance agriculture. It's all pointing to the state of the debt.
Okay, Edmond, I would like to come in here. I believe the intention of this debt was to, finance infrastructure projects. So you need infrastructure to spur economic development in any country. And you've rightly pointed out to some of those projects, even though you say they're not, some of them might be the pricing and the financing of the debt. You might have some problems with it. Zambia defaulted on its debt majorly because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is no fault of any government. Nobody saw this coming. So you have a new government in place, government of His Excellency Hakainde Hichilema. who is inheriting all those problems. Do you think Zambia should call for debt forgiveness or restructure its debt financing? Because when you have a situation where you're servicing debt for 60% of your income, how much more will be left to projects like agriculture, education, and social development projects, and all of that? So if you were in his shoes as Mr. President, what would be the best route to go about it?
Thank you very much. I think, yes, as it is now, I think we're back to where we were like in the HIPIC stage, where we were asking for debt cancellation. And that's the way to go now. So I think as it is now, we're asking for debt cancellation because the way we are, like the president said, our debt, the coffers are just empty. Our debts are really constraining in terms of the growth of the economy. Even just the prospect of all the good promises that the president made, they cannot be attained until we deal with our debt. So the aspect of where we are in terms of how do we actually deal with this is the aspect of debt cancellation. We really need to go back to the countries that we owe and ask for debt forgiveness, whether they could actually help cancel the debt that we actually have with those particular countries. The second aspect is the aspect of debt restructuring. As it is, a lot of debt in terms of the interests are falling in the year 2022. In the year 2024, with the first, I think the second Eurobond is due. And we're also talking about the third Eurobond, where we also need to pay quite a big, huge amount of money. Like we have in 2023, we need to pay about $1.1 billion in terms of the principles and the day and the interest on that. And we can't afford. Zambia, as it is now, is broke because the new government took up a government that doesn't have anything in the coffers. So we can't even pay any particular debt. So it's the aspect of debt forgiveness and debt restructuring. That's the way to go. Otherwise, yeah, we need to borrow to pay back the loans, and that will just go into a vicious cycle of borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. That would be my simple answer on that.
All right, so let me come back to Johnston, because even with powering up the economy to move away from dependence on copper, to be able to add to whatever the economy brings in and work towards a better economy, electricity is a major problem. You are the chairman of the Energy Forum for Zambia, but we need to look at where electrification of the country is going, because businesses run on electricity. Small and medium-scale businesses are the backbone of any economy. 31% of the country's population has access to electricity, while only about 4% of rural areas are electrified. So let's start looking at a future conversation now. We know what the past held, but Zambia is looking forward. With a new president at a very auspicious time, what are the plans? What has the president stated are plans towards providing more electricity for Zambians in order to be able to help the economy? You cannot power the economy if you cannot turn on the lights. So Johnson, what have the president said are his plans towards that?
Mm-hmm. Well, on 10th of September, he went to Parliament and addressed Parliament for the first time. In his speech, he gave an indication of what we can expect. In fact, this week on Friday, the Minister of Finance will be presenting the 2022 budget, which I believe is going to be informed, guided and mentored by his speech when he addressed Parliament, and also arising from the ruling party manifesto. Some of the major themes that have emerged is talking about rebuilding the economy. And to rebuild that economy, of course, the issue of energy is going to take center stage, because it is virtually impossible to build a modern economy without sufficient energy. We have been having a situation of tariffs in the electricity sector that are not cost reflective. So the president has talked about it, that his administration is going to move towards the cost reflective tariffs in order to attract more private investors in the energy sector. Because if the tariff is not adequate, then there is no investor who is going to come because they won't be able to recover their investment. So one of the major bottlenecks has been an inadequate electricity tariff, and he is committed to solving this particular issue. The other theme that has emerged is his pledge to continue building on some of the major energy infrastructure projects which were left incomplete by the previous government, because those were a national priority issue, and I believe they will be exported into the 8th National Development Plan, which is going to take effect in January. So he has also committed to fostering energy security in the country. Energy security is a state where you have the energy as and when you need it. We've got a lot of energy poverty in the country, not just in Zambia alone, but the entire SADC region is in a state of energy poverty where you don't have sufficient energy to go around as and when we need it. So like you accurately pointed out, we have serious challenges with the rural areas. Rural electrification at the moment has moved on from some figures. We were at 3% just a couple of years ago, but now we have reached the 8%. It's still a far cry because we are signatories to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which include goal number 7. Now, goal number 7 calls for universal access to affordable, clean and sustainable energy for all by the year 2030. We are signatory to that, and we have a mountain to climb. If we are standing at 8% with rural electrification, we are standing at about 37 thereabout percent in the urban areas, of which we have quite significant mammoth task to build. So the average electrification for the country is around 65%. That's because the rural areas are more connected than the rural areas. So to put it forward and going forward, I'm hoping and trusting that this budget that the new Dawn government is going
there.
All right, I think some connections
connection
there. But coming back to the visuals live from Lusaka, there you can see the president. He's been, okay, this is during elections, I beg your pardon. So this is around the time that President Hakainde Hichilema was voting for himself and his party, of course, running for the past 15 years, 6th time. He finally won the election and became president.
It in style.
Yes, he did. Landslide.
Yes.
It was. Edmond, let me come to you. Sorry, Gwenga. Let me quickly come to Edmond on this, because we're talking about electrifying the country, turning on the lights so that businesses can power. But one of the things that brought many Zambians out in this historic election was about jobs, employment. Young people came out in some interesting numbers in this election, and they really are the ones, many say, actually pushed the man also known as HH into the presidency, because they want jobs, they want economic opportunities. So as we look towards the future, we know that Zambia is in conversations with the IMF. Zambia is looking at the heavily indebted poor countries initiative. You've mentioned the issue around debt cancellation and possible restructuring as well. But when we're looking forward, what does the president have to work with? His promises, his party has their manifesto online, and from the party's manifesto, they want to create quality jobs, particularly for youth and women, eradicate poverty and inequality, provide universal access to high quality education, healthcare, I beg your pardon, attain macroeconomic stability and prioritize areas of national development. And there's more. What does the president have to work with in order to make his promises a reality? And we're not talking now, but at least we see progress before the end of his tenure.
So if you look at the president, I think in his address to parliament, he also acknowledges the high inequality in Zambia, of the differences also between the haves and have-nots in terms of the gap really increasing. the high poverty levels are really high in the country now. We're talking about more than 40% of the population living in abject poverty. The whole aspect now, if you look at the current government, the one who ushered them into government now are the youth. And the promise that they will create jobs for them. I think that's one of the cardinal issues that are really coming through. And if you look at Zambia in terms of what is there, I think for Zambia now, I think in the earlier discussion, we're talking about Zambia being a mining dependent country. And there's so much potential there. Look at now, I think in the past, since last year into to date, I think we talk about Northwestern Province now housing, becoming a gold area where we discovered good amounts of gold in Northwestern Province, more especially in Mwinilunga. And so if you look at the economy now, I think most of it is dependent on copper and gold, diamonds, manganese extraction. So how do we actually take advantage of this? And we talk about now, if you look at the president talks about issues of value addition, and also trying to look at the value chain in terms of how we can actually promote that. We can extract copper, yes, it's a good thing, but what value addition can we do that in terms of providing, we're ensuring that we can actually make our own copper wires, how can we actually upgrade in terms of what things can we actually do from copper? Even so, we have diamonds now, we have gold. What value addition can we have there? Instead of as it is now, most of, for instance, we used to have, a few years ago, we used to have a manganese plant in Luapula where they would actually produce batteries, but that has really died down. So the president now is talking about how do you reinstate such factories where we're extracting manganese. How do we ensure that we do value additions? How do we actually make sure that we have a factory that does batteries? We have a lot of diamonds now, we have amethyst. So what value addition can we actually do from there? So even so, I think the president talks about how he's going to do, ensure that there are policies and also legislation that talks to that, where we are seeing a lot of imports actually coming from outside Zambia, where a lot of things, like for example, basic things that are being manufactured and imported in the country, where we could actually do them in inland. So the government or the president actually talks about how do we actually ensure that we bring it about the industrialization of the country. Talk about issues of tourism, I think talks about the huge potential. As it is now, we're talking about the hydro. Zambia is rich in rivers. So how do we take advantage of those particular rivers, and how do we ensure that we have enough hydro stations? And if we do have enough hydro system stations, and that means we're going to do a lot of constructions. So when you have construction, then we're hoping that that will lead to higher growth of the economy. So there's a lot of things that the president says, and he looks at also the agriculture sector, which is really a springboard, where he talks about issues of livestock development, issues of ensuring that we invest more in crops that actually give us the value of money. And so he talks about how do we ensure that the agriculture sector also becomes productive. So he talks about also policies that actually are going to be initiated. So in the next, more especially in the next year, in 2022, and more especially when the national budget is announced probably in the next week or the other week, it's going to give us hope, and in terms of how the government is actually going to operationalize whatever they promised, because a lot of things were promised, and we're hoping that, and one of the indicators that we're looking at is the budget now for 2022. Once that is announced, it will tell us whether we're going in the right direction or wrong direction. So yeah, there's so much that needs to be done right now.
Okay, Edmond, I'm happy you mentioned tourism in your response, and tourism has the potential to be a significant driver of economic growth for your country. Zambia, everyone knows Livingstone, they know the Victoria Falls. So what are some of the other tourism offerings that Zambia has for the world to enjoy, and even Zambians themselves?
Yes, for example, if you look at Zambia now, I think that the Livingstone, I think what people talk about is the Victoria Falls now. But Zambia has about other 6 beautiful falls. If you look at Northwestern Province, there are two. In Luapula Province, there are also about 3 falls that you actually find there. Besides that, you also find a lot of national parks. You go to Lower Zambezi, you find beautiful animals, beautiful scenery in terms of when you go there, I think you really enjoy it. If you go to Eastern Province, in Mfue, you find beautiful sites there in terms of animals, all kinds of animals, lions, giraffes, hippos, you find there. So there's so much potential that we can actually look at. Even just the monument sites in Southern Province, I think we have those. So there's a lot of things that actually, when you come into Zambia, there's a lot of things that you can actually do and actually go and see. So yeah, so I think that's why we also managed to do our national airports. I think we have upgraded most of our national airports now. Looking at Lusaka now, it's state of the art, where we're trying to ensure that, if you look at Zambia now, I think it's in the central hub of Africa. So how do we take advantage of that? People actually pass through Zambia's airport. As it is, if you look at 2 years ago, it was really a small airport, but now I think it's really big. It can accommodate a lot of flights. So those are some of the things. If you look at also Copperbelt Province has upgraded its airport. Livingstone has also upgraded its airport, all in an intention that we need to ensure that Zambia becomes one of the favorite destinations in Africa.
And I definitely look forward to visiting in the nearest future. I'm sure Tolutu wouldn't mind a visit to Zambia.
I'm always looking for a visit anywhere. Vacation is always on my mind. All right, we have Johnston back with us, and I want to widen this conversation. We had spoken to Edmond about the debt as well, and we talked about the promises from the president. We've touched on that aspect regarding electricity and electrifying the country, but I also want to bring in the IMF now. We know that the country has been in talks with the IMF. These talks have been said to be very progressive. But in recent times, many people are saying, as the West is warning us about China, we should also be careful about some of the Western multilateral lenders as well. Because we have the history of SAP, the structural adjustment programs on the continent, and how those went. And those were pushed by the Bretton Woods institutions of the World Bank and the IMF. So now back to the IMF. Zambia is in conversation, very progressive conversation, according to officials of the government as well, wanting to open up, liberalize the economy, widen the tax base, possibly increase taxes and all. Are there any concerns as to what possible reforms the IMF may push that might just be too much for the Zambian people right at this point in time? Johnston, let me start with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Of course, each time the word IMF comes up, it evokes certain memories in the minds of Zambians because of the history that we have gone through each time we engage them. But it looks they also restructured quite a lot, like they have reformed their processes. But what comes to people is a harsh conditions that is usually attached to the loans that come from the IMF, and of course they are to ensure the money goes to the intended use, to ensure that you cut out excess fat so that you are so lean that you'll be able to repay back the loans. But people are quite averse, when they hear the IMF, they are on the table. But of course, it appears to give more confidence to the other lenders as well, because they know that they want to sign up to those conditions. Then as you begin to implement them, then there is almost guaranteed, outlook that the economy is going to be put in a good shape. So it is something that we're looking forward to, and I believe that they won't be as harsh as they were in the previous times. But of course, certain things are a given. They want to ensure that, obviously, they would want to ensure that subsidies and healthy subsidies, especially in the energy sector, we still have some subsidies there. Definitely, I'm expecting that the IMF is going to flag some subsidies. I'm expecting that they are likely going to flag against the excess labor, bloated labor force in the civil service and in certain parastatals. And they are going to ensure that a certain number of austerity measures are implemented. That can be expected. It can be expected, and I'm also looking forward to it. Yeah.
So
Zambians should basically just brace themselves up for tougher times
ahead.
Yes.
And he mentioned some of the very key words. So Johnson has mentioned austerity measures, subsidies as well. If you follow the Somalia IMF conversation, you know that Somalians are not smiling with some of the austerity measures that have been put in place to help liberalize the economy. But Edmond, let me come to you and get your thoughts on this, because these talks are likely going to be finalized anytime in the near future. They're going to push Zambia into another direction, hoping to tighten things up. But austerity measures, removing subsidies, dealing with an over-bloated public civil service. That's a conversation many African countries are still struggling to have with the IMF.
And how much leverage, negotiating power does Zambia have to negotiate the terms?
All right, Edmond, let's hear your thoughts on this. Hello, Edmond.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
So if you look at the Zambian economy now, I think is a lot of things are not what we expected. You look at poverty is high, unemployment is high, but the economy needs to move. And what people are looking forward to in terms of the new government is relief. But the figures are telling us that we need to tighten our belt, we need to kill the smiles, we need to increase our taxes if we're going to grow the economy in terms of raising the revenues that we actually need in terms of particular services. You look at the education, health, infrastructure, and also just the debt payments. We need to increase our revenue base. So what does that mean? That means we need to tax more people. And in certain circumstances where we need to increase the tax on the health people. So there's so much that we need to do. Even so, if you look at the much talked about the bloated civil service. If we cut down the numbers, meaning that we're going to throw again people in unemployment, what does that mean? Yeah. And do we have any safety nets that are actually going to help us in terms of ensuring that we don't escalate the debt, the high poverty levels that are already there, then high inequalities which are already there. So it's really a tight corner for the current government in terms of how they're going to balance, in terms of trying to remove the relief from people, and at the same time trying to grow the economy. Because as it is now, I think the economy really went into the negative growth. But now post-COVID, not that we are out of COVID situation, but it's much better now. How do we actually now make progress, go into the positive numbers? So those are the things that we need to look at. Even just so, if you talk about issues of subsidies, remove subsidies on fuel and all the other subsidies on electricity, what does that mean? That means you're going to increase the prices of these particular goods. And if you increase the prices of particular goods, very few people will actually fall in the brackets of being able to afford this, meaning that we're going to throw again people into poverty. So how do we actually balance the situation of trying to please your voters, at the same time trying to grow the economy? I think that's why the 2022 budget will be very interesting to read, because we need to look at the balancing formula. As it is now, the numbers are not quite positive. They're telling us we need to increase in taxes, we need to increase on expenditure, but where is the money going to come from? And most of of course, if you look at, we had a lot of tax leakages. If you look at most of the manufacturing companies were not paying the right tax. Even so, they were not being followed up in terms of whether they have paid and why they haven't paid. Even the penalties were not being followed up. So we're hoping that we're going to have more stringent measures in terms of trying to follow up in terms of taxation. Look us again back to the mining sector. A lot of mining companies are not paying their tax or rightful tax. So we're looking at how do we ensure that we demand for that particular taxes to be paid. Even those who have arrears, let them pay. The Auditor General, of course, tells us about people misusing funds, misapplication, theft by civil servants. So we're hoping that all those loopholes are going to close. Once they close, that means we're going to have money for services and also infrastructure development, economic development. So the whole aspect now, I think we lost a lot of money through corruption and shady deals. So once that is done, we are hoping that we're going to release or we're going to ring fence money that is meant for poverty and economic development. Even so, the government now talks about relevering the playing field, where if everyone now will be given an opportunity, if there are any particular contracts or bids that need to be done, it will be done on merit basis. As it is now, I think the past government, it was more looking at your face, and now I think the government is now emphasizing on it's going to be on a competitive basis. Once that is done, we're hoping that people will be more encouraged in terms of opening up industries, opening up companies, and that we're talking about issues of employment. And once the employment, and we're talking about once that is done, we're talking about issues of multiplier effects now, where more taxes will be paid and everything else.
All right, Edmond and Johnston, thank you so much. Taking a look at the economy as it stands with Zambia celebrating 57 years. There's a lot more. He's mentioned the mining companies. They've been using, I guess we'd say, their position to their advantage to try to gain a bit more. And we saw the former president, Edgar Lunga, try to sort of not nationalize them, but exert more, get more out from them.
Yes. And it's quite interesting that it's not a very pretty place that Zambia is at the moment.
Yeah.
They're between a rock and a hard place. So but with reforms, hopefully going forward, they will begin to reap the benefits, but tough times ahead.
All right, so we'll have to say thank you again to our guest for joining us, Edmond Kagamundazi. He's an economist, a Zambian economist, as well as Johnston Chikwanda, the chairperson of the Energy Forum of Zambia. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Once again, we say Happy Independence Day to you. Celebrate well, and we look forward to having more conversations about the future of Zambia.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
So you are, of course, watching us live from Lagos, Nigeria. This is News Central, where we put Africa first, joining Zambians across the continent and across the world as the country marks 57 years of independence. An extensive conversation we've had about the economic fortunes of the country and where it will take the country with the new president.